Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much again for making it out here to our second meet and greet with our District 12 and 29 legislators. My name is Warren Abrahamson. I'm with the Jamestown Area Chamber of Commerce. A few quick housekeeping things. We've got coffee and water up here, so feel free to help yourself to that as we go along. I'll try my best to get into as many questions as possible. We're obviously limited on time, but if you see Vincent over here dressed up very well, he can come around and grab your index card, so if you have one, just hold it up for him, and he'll come get that. And then Barb and the North Dakota League of Women Voters are assisting us with grabbing those questions today as well. And so with that, we can get started. We're going to hopefully wrap up by 10:30. And then if the legislators would like to stick around and discuss more, if questions are not got to, or if you want to talk with them, they're more than free to do that. And you're more than welcome to stay and ask them any questions as well. So with that, we will get started. I'll just quickly introduce our legislators so we can get right to the questions this morning. Joining us this morning, we have Representative Bernie Satrom, we have Representative Mitch Osley, Senator Cole Conley, Senator Terry Wanzik, and at the end we have Representative Craig Hedlund. So we appreciate them being here. Today's Representative Don Vigasa could not join us, but we appreciate those who were able to join us today. So with that, we can get started, and I just have I have my list of questions as they're getting the questions from the audience ready. So hopefully we can start. I want to start with softball ones, but we know that's not how it always works, right? So we can start. I believe we should start with maybe the tax reform, as that's been talked about. Several bills this session have aimed to reduce property taxes, including House Bill 1575, which proposes significant relief funded by the state's legacy fund earnings. Additionally, Governor Armstrong has outlined a plan to eliminate property taxes on primary residences within the next decade by leveraging oil tax revenues. How do you view these approaches to property tax reform, and what impacts do you anticipate they will have on local services and budgets in our district? So how we did this last time, any senator or representative who wants to talk first, I'll hand them the mic, and then you can go from there. So.
So next week we get to work on House Bill 1176, which is basically...
Louder.
A little bit closer.
How about now?
That's
All right. So next week we get to work on 1176, which is a governor's bill. I didn't have any gray hair last week, but so there are some suggested amendments for that bill. Even the governor recognizes that it's just kind of a starting point. So we will be dealing with that in appropriations, I believe, Monday afternoon. There's already, well, not everybody's unified on the approach to take. 1450 is the starting point. Not everybody agrees that that's the right number. Not everybody agrees that there should be some skin in the game for the taxpayers. And not everybody agrees on the suggested caps. So we will try to figure that out next week. I don't know if we'll get that done. You know, you kind of got to understand how the budget works. You know, we start out with a pretty large number for a budget, but a third of that, or over a third, goes to, you know, it's federal money, and that's dedicated to those things. And another approximate third are special funds. Special funds are like, an example would be workforce safety and insurance. Those are funded by employer contributions, and those are dedicated to that. So basically we have not quite a third left, and a bunch of that is already dedicated somewhere else. So the number just keeps shrinking. So those are dollars we're working with. We need to try to fund the property tax relief as well as all the other budgets. So, thank you.
We'll give it to Brady, he's the tax expert.
Well, thanks for the question. I think it's been what I've worked on predominantly since the very beginning of this session. We had the different property tax bills before us. I had about 50, almost 60 bills in regards to property tax. The first half of the session, what we finally whittled it down to were 3 different concepts that we did move forward to the Senate. I think the Senate has settled in pretty much on House Bill 1176, a bill that in some ways I and the House Tax Committee completely rewrote from its original design. The original design had the intent of taking every primary residence to 0. We took that out. We don't know that we believe in that. We put in some provisions to help the political subdivisions deal with the restrictions of caps. Some of them stayed in the bill. One of them, the opt-out provision where we allowed a county to opt out or a city to opt out of the cap altogether, was stripped out of the bill in House appropriations, which I didn't really think was appropriate because the policy committee, which I chair, had put it in. So I am hopeful that the Senate does amend the bill. And, I don't know, I haven't actually seen the amendments that the Senate is going to be offering up on Monday. I've heard anecdotally there's a provision to take the cap from 3% to 2%. I don't think I agree with that. I think I have also heard that there's a move to possibly take the 1450 down to 1250. I don't know that I agree that we need to do that either. What I do agree with that I've heard that they're thinking about is putting some type of percentage into the equations, so no one's primary residence goes to 0 today. If we want to take properties to 0 in the future, and the future legislators have the funding ability to do it, that's a decision they should make. I don't think we're equipped right now to make it, so I don't really favor that. Somebody mentioned, or I believe the question referenced House Bill 1575, which it was a bill that would have provided relief across all classes of property. There was and is a lot of desire to be able to do that. However, at this time, it's very expensive. And if you're going to provide anything that's meaningful to the taxpayer, I think the way the bill passed, it was $703 million, and the legislature just isn't equipped right now to handle that kind of funding with all the other needs across the state. So it appears that 1176 is going to be the bill, and again, I'm hoping that we can get that into a conference committee, so those of us policymakers who worked on the bill have another chance to make it better. We ran out of time on the House side to really finish the bill the way we believe it should be. So that's why, another reason why I hope it gets into conference.
Well, as an appropriator on the Appropriations Committee and working with budgets, I don't get to be involved as much in all those exciting things like property tax or eminent domain or carbon capture or private school vouchers. I deal with budgets. Nobody really wants to talk about how many FTEs the state treasurer gets. That's not as exciting, but we will have to deal with 1176. It's coming to the Appropriations Committee in the Senate. And some of the amendments, as Representative Hedlund described, I would support as well. You know, I think it's not probably prudent to take one class of property down to zero. And in some cases, that's the way it's designed right now, would go to zero. And there is an amendment that would say that's limited to 75%. You could end up getting the full $1,450 tax credit on your primary home. And let me say that primary homes, targeting primary homes does make sense. You know, most of us have a home and a primary home and are paying taxes on it, and it would single out, in my view, more of North Dakota citizens. You know, where some property, if we provide a huge property tax decrease, it's going to out-of-state people and it's leaving our state. That's of some concern. But by going to zero, what troubles me about that is if you look into the future, that's going to shift the burden. You know, if there's ever a need for a bond project, bonding project or whatever, naturally, if one class of property taxpayers are paying zero, it's pretty easy to vote for it if it's going to be somebody else paying for it. So, you know, we, right now, those of us who represent large rural areas are getting a little bit of heat from rural people, farmers and that, about some relief for farmland, for instance. Right at the moment, I think we're focusing on the primary homes. And we're going to be addressing the amendments these two other representatives talked about, the 75%, the reduction in the percentage of caps from 3 to 2, which I would tend to agree. I know we've gotten pushback and have gotten a lot of emails from political subs with the 3% reduction or cap and how that will cause some hardship. But anyway, what I hear from a lot of the farmers in District 29 that have contacted me, we call it the Louser bill. Representative Louser sponsored it. It's buying down mill levies for public education. It's the state covering those mills and reducing the mills on your property, which would be more broadcast across all classes of property taxpayers and benefit most everybody. I don't know how we're going to get to that point. It's pretty difficult as an appropriator right now. I know we're like $300 million yet over our balanced budget. We're going to have to identify general fund dollars of $300 million to get our budget balanced. And to add 2 property tax relief bills at this time would make that very difficult to do. You know, we got to find that balance, and that's what our job is as appropriators, is to find that balance, to try to find the fairest mechanism to provide property tax relief and reform, and to still have a balanced budget for the taxpayers of North Dakota.
I don't really have a whole lot of anything to add to that. These guys, on the end here, are dealing with the appropriations part and the policy part in their committees more directly. But just one of the things that maybe wasn't hit on a little bit on the proposal of a property tax credit, where emphasis has been on the primary homeowner, but there's also provisions in there for those individuals who don't own a home and rent, and that was, at least in proposal right now, last session I think it was it $300? $400 credit, and they're looking at increasing that to maybe a $600 credit. But again, those are moving numbers all the time. Terry gets to figure out who gives the break or not on the appropriations, and Senator Conley. And then the other tricky part, on the reform side, we talk a lot about relief, but on the reform side, and this is where our cities and counties have some concerns, is because the caps are always nice to talk about, and those of us we all pay some form of tax, but we also need to allow excuse me, the tricky part is to allow the flexibility for, for the political subs. If there's a big need for, you know, if there's a big growth or something, or a big need for the political subs to increase, we have to allow for some of that flexibility so they can not stymie growth, I guess. So that's just a few of my comments.
All right, thank you. We have a lot of questions about Senate Bill 2307. That is the library materials bill, and I'll do my best. There's a lot of questions about it, so hopefully I can ask something that addresses the questions that we have from the audience. But Senate Bill 2307 proposes creating restricted areas in public libraries for materials that may be considered obscene, along with an age verification system for Odin at a projected cost of over $1 million. How do you balance concerns over protecting children with the need for public access, local control, and responsible use of taxpayer dollars?
Good morning, everybody. Glad you're here. My committee, actually, the committee that I'm on, has heard the library bill. And there's about 3 different components to that. One is let me just say this first of all, is I believe we've got great libraries in Jamestown, and I believe that they've been very conscientious historically to take care of things. Most of the libraries in the state are excellent. What this is about is keeping sexually explicit information out of the hands of children. It's in our laws. And so it's just about, within the library, if there's sexually explicit information, it should be readily accessible to children. That's what this is about. It's about safety of children. And so part of that bill was saying, hey, if you got sexually explicit information, keep it out of the children's section, put up a rope, move it somewhere else. I think it's really a common sense thing. Outside the library, I think it's like a Class C misdemeanor. It always has been. It's always been illegal to allow children to have sexually explicit information. And some of you probably know that sexually explicit information is used by groomers and sexual abusers, and it's not a positive thing for children to have sexually explicit information, have access to it, particularly at a young age. So that's what that's about. And unfortunately, what's happened is that we have, I would say that 95% of the libraries in our state are excellent. We have great librarians. I'd say that 99% of our librarians are great people, and they're doing a great job, and including librarian I'm looking at right now. And I'm proud of the work that they do. Unfortunately, we had a bill last session regarding this topic, and unfortunately what happened is that we have a few librarians around the state that really don't care. They kind of defy the state law, and so what happened is that we have another law, this bill this session to address it again. So it's really unfortunate. I am personally weary of book bills and library bills and discussion. I'm personally weary of it. But the dilemma is, what do we do when you've got a few, what I would call bad actors, that won't listen and are defying our laws? So this sets up, what this does is it sets up a process. It sets up a process to where people can address the issue, and it's a multi-step process to address the issue, the complaints and the concerns, and move it forward. So that's what that's about.
Anybody else want to?
So we dealt with that in the Senate. It wasn't extremely popular. It did pass 27 to 20. I agree with Representative Satrom that you should make sexually explicit material a little harder for children to get, and this bill addresses that. So anyway.
Here again, this is a bill that we didn't get to spend a lot of time deliberating on, being in appropriations, and I guess when it's presented to us as is with the request to make pornographic, sexually explicit material less accessible to children. It's kind of hard from an emotional standpoint to not vote for that. And if it's going beyond those steps, that's the way it was presented. That's all I understood it did, is require library to put those books in a restricted area for adults. And I mean, it seemed to make sense and seemed reasonable to me, but maybe those who work in the library could present something different to me. And I do agree, I think it's because, and we deal, most of the laws we deal with, because of a small percentage that do not comply and cause the problems. And I'm aware of a few situations where there was no compliance or there was some problems. I know legislators that, I know of a legislator that didn't vote for this bill before, who did recently because he got involved in a local school library situation where they were ignoring the law. And unfortunately, that's why these bills come up, is because of a small percentage. And while most of our people are good and honorable people and complying with the law and not creating a problem, but that's why these things come to us.
I don't really have anything to add.
I'll just add a couple of things. Just changing the law won't do anything if there are individuals who continue to ignore the law. Right now in the library situation, I think for the most part it's in pretty good shape. If you have a concern with something in the library, you should go to the librarian. If you don't like the answer you get there is a library board. If you don't like the answer there, they're under control of either city council or county commission. So those are important steps in the process to deal with a lot of issues. But sometimes we jump a few levels of governing bodies and go right to the legislature, and we're supposed to fix some of this stuff. Well, if there are some of those situations where there is somebody ignoring the law, we can't fix that, in my opinion. Who's supposed to bring charges against these individuals who are breaking the law? That's not any of us sitting at this table. So that local law enforcement agency needs to bring those charges, and if they have a lot of authority, whether it's the sheriff's office or state's attorney, those are the ones that are bringing the charges, and we're overstepping a whole lot of levels there. And if there's somebody that's ignoring the law, like I said, we need to, I don't know, deal with it from the state's attorney's level. So anyway, that's my point.
That was kind of some of the follow-up, so I appreciate that. And yeah, the questions that we did receive were, in those issue places, like you said, Satcham, how are we, where local officials weren't persuaded to restrict materials, why does that mandate statewide restrictions, was one of the follow-ups, and I think Representative Osley had that. This question it is directed to Cole and Mitch, but I'm sure anybody else can speak on this. There's an understanding that you recently met with Governor Kelly Armstrong about Bison World. They're curious how that meeting went and what was discussed at that meeting, if you can share.
I'm going to let Mitch go first because he was actually, he attended the whole meeting, and Senator Wanzik and I we were in session and wound up getting there late.
Not a lot to report on that, I guess, other than I thought the meeting went well. It was just basically a presentation to Governor Armstrong about the project. He's been prepped on it a little bit before during the campaign season. The project is still alive, I guess, is the best summation that I can make with that. Not a whole lot to report as far as what Governor Armstrong's take was on the project. Didn't say yes, didn't say no, kept everything pretty close to the vest, but I do believe he's going to look at the project quite deeply, and that's encouraging, and then we will see where it goes. But that's, a little bit to report. The project is still viable. I think it's super viable. I'm 100% on board with this project. It's just we need to get multiple branches of the government to say yay.
I did meet with the governor right after on 1176, and he brought up, the first thing he brought up was Bison World. And a couple of questions and a couple of comments, and I won't put words in his mouth, but I had the strong sense that he supported the project. I guess that was what I came away with, that he certainly supported it.
I had the same situation. I joined, Senator Conley and I joined the full meeting with the governor and the Bison World folks from Jamestown here. And we came in late because we were in session. But the governor, again, he met with us individually, met with me individually on 1176, the property tax issue. But before we got into that, we did discuss Bison World. And I do feel, within my gut, I feel that we have a better chance of this Governor Armstrong showing some interest and support for Bison World. I didn't see that quite as to the same degree with the previous governor. And there are some accomplishments already. There's during the first part of the legislative session, where Bison World would be located is mostly all state-owned land. And typically, it's hard to get a lease beyond 2 years, because every 2 years we meet in a legislative session, and we cannot bind the hands of future legislators. So it was hard to get a long-term lease on that land to build a park. Investors are not going to put their money in this investment if we only have access to the property for 2 years. So there's been work done in the House, and it's in the Human Service budget, I believe, and there's a 99-year lease. Working through the state law and everything, I guess, has been researched and has been developed, and it's on the books. And if it stays in the budget and makes it to the end, we will have solved that problem. That makes it more attractive to outside investors to know that we have access to land, and that's a pretty big deal, because if you were having to go out and buy commercial land and fund this project, and along with the development and construction and all that, and the cost of the land, the state's basically going to lease the land for 99 years at little or no cost, from what I understand. So that will greatly enhance the opportunities. I'm visiting with Corey Shevlin, our local economic development person. I'm going to try to schedule a meeting with our majority leaders from the House and the Senate and talk about the potential. I've had some of the leaders ask me, well, what would it take? What would it take to help Bison World out, to get going on the road? And I said, I don't quote me for sure, but I would say around $30 to $40 million. And they all were somewhat surprised that it wasn't more. They thought it was going to be a lot more, but I think there's been a lot of work done by your local people, a lot of good work, a lot of good effort in putting the project together. And I know they've talked to me about it being a post-subsidy support from the state. In other words, we would get the state help, we would obligate the state help, but we would make it contingent upon the private dollars there. So that the private investors see that obligation, that would maybe make it more palatable and more interesting for the private investors, and at the same time, if they step up then are matching these state dollars, anytime we can get the private funds to, in economic development, if we can get private funds to match state funds, the state is more likely to do that. I don't know how many of you knew anything about the fertilizer plant that was looking at Spiritwood. Last session, we put aside $125 million as an incentive for them to build that, but it was all post-production. They would have had to invest $3.5 billion in building a fertilizer plant, and they would have had to roll urea or nitrogen fertilizer off the assembly line before we gave 1 penny of that. So that ended up is stalled temporarily, and so you as taxpayers did not spend 1 penny yet on that, and will only spend 1 penny if the thing is actually built. And you know, with that kind of approach to asking for funding for Bison World might help open the doors a little bit. It's the only reason I'm bringing it up. But I have hopes. There's nothing earmarked for Bison World, but there are programs in the Commerce Department that could provide these funds. And we're trying to, I get the Commerce budget in our committee, the committee I chair, so you know, we're trying to make sure there's some money in the development fund and the destination tourism grants. Those would be 2 examples where Bison World could go to get some resources. And I think that's what we need to work with Kelly Armstrong. I know the Commerce Commissioner is going to be visiting with the local people and working with them on trying to develop this plan before we get done with the legislature. And we're going to try to get in and visit with the majority leaders as well and try to get something rolling here so we can someday take our grandkids to Bison World.
Well, I will just have a short comment on this. I'm more optimistic now than I probably have been in the past. I've had several conversations with the governor about it as I've met with him over property taxes. We always end up, and let's not forget about Bison World, so we always want to bring it to his attention, and of course, his response has always been, you know, I think I love that Bison World project, but he says, I think it really should be in Dickinson, which is just kind of because he's from Dickinson. So I do believe he believes in the project. Terry provided a funding mechanism, I believe, in the Commerce budget to do it. On the House side, I've had discussions with the chairman of that subsection that has that money, and I've got him to agree to add even more money to that. So, you know, in legislation, it's hard for us to single out a project like this. You know, it's not that it has never been done, but in this particular case, we have a group of legislators in both chambers that are just almost against everything when it comes to anything that appears like it's economic development. And, you know, that we had a route, I think last time, that ended up dying in the House because the whole debate became about Bison World. And it really didn't have anything to do with Bison World, but that's what it became about, and the funding was defeated. So, you know, we're still working hard. I'm optimistic, but we do still have those same challenges.
One of the things we need to do in North Dakota is diversify our economy. Ag and energy are fantastic. Tourism would be really helpful. I think one of the mistakes that we've made, or the bad perception or the improper perception, is people think this is all about Jamestown. And I would argue it's all about North Dakota. So I think that's, and unfortunately people say, well, you're doing this for Jamestown, then what about my town? Well, my argument is this is all about North Dakota. So I think if we can keep the focus on this is for North Dakota and for our future, I think we're going to be better off. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next, we have many questions about this. From the vouchers for private schools to the closure of the Department of Education at the national level. I guess the question would be, and I'll ask kind of like a hodgepodge of these questions and maybe get to one big question with it, but there's arguments that giving money to private schools may hurt or even kill a small school in a rural community. There might be some schools that already struggle. There's many that are against that, saying private schools can pick and choose who they enroll, while public schools are required to accept all students. So I think maybe just in the broad sense, the question could be, why support vouchers for private schools, and where does that stop? Where does that start? And what's the discussion of how that may affect our public schools statewide?
Nobody wants this.
Hands up.
I don't know that any of us work with education directly, maybe some of you other guys do, but I like the idea of having some money available. Obviously, we don't want to be closing down our public schools or damaging them in small areas, but let's just take, for example, if you have a child that has special needs, or maybe a child that has special abilities, and you want to, they want to learn 14 different languages by the time they're 14 years old. Just opportunities for parents, regardless of where the children are, that maybe don't have a lot of money to be able to, have a few $100s to go out and help their child excel in an area or help them to anyway. So that's kind of my thought process. I'm not on that committee, so but anyway, those are just some of my personal thoughts.
I don't know how many of you were here on the last little chamber-sponsored event. We touched on this a little bit. My basic mindset on the voucher system, or I'm not in favor of voucher systems per se. The education savings account concept, I can wrap my head around that a little bit, because I think it can focus on student learning or enhance student learning. And as Representative Satram had said, if you have a student that maybe is a special, needs a tutor or something like that, and a few extra dollars can help the families with that situation, with cost for tutoring or advanced courses, whether it's foreign language or math or whatever. Conceptually, I can get behind that. But sometimes and this has been this is a debate, and it always ends up, or I shouldn't say always, but it will probably end up in court. We have this thing in North Dakota called the Constitution, and it says no public dollars for any secretary in schools. Now, in some other states who their constitution is maybe a little different than North Dakota's, there's been some court cases surrounding that. And even their Supreme Court that might say it's okay to spend some public dollars for private schools isn't a unanimous court decision. One that's referenced quite a bit is state of Montana. That was a 5-4 decision. So there were 4 Supreme Court justices in Montana that said, yeah, you shouldn't be able to do that. So that's one question. But again, like I said, conceptually, if we look at it, if it enhances student learning, I can get behind that. But a lot of these dollars so far in past sessions have basically just been a subsidy, and it does nothing to enhance student learning. So that's just a few of my thoughts.
So Senate Bill 2400 is an education savings account. It gives $500 to every public school student to use for, like Representative Satram said, tutoring. Could also be used for, there's been a move for free school lunches. And while free school lunches, they're not really free, they cost somebody something. At this point, the federal government pays for free and reduced meals on the, if the state went with the proposed free school lunch thing, those funds would be in jeopardy, but, I kind of digress on that. So anyway, the $500, if you look at the amount of public school students, and you look at the funding, probably 80% of that does go to public schools. Private schools would get in the proposed bill $3,500, but that's means tested, so that is Senate Bill 2400.
As far as this question, I know everybody seems to be pitting public schools versus private schools. I don't see it that way. I see this totally different than most who say that. I see this as empowering parents and empowering students to have a choice, where in some situations they're limited in their ability to make that choice. 2400 is an education savings account. It does provide $500 as it is now. I know that talking to the sponsor, she would like to raise that to $1,000, but it's $500 per student, and that includes public school students. So 80% of the funding in that bill is going to public school students. And they can use that to pay for school lunches, to pay for tutoring or fees of any sort that might, for some extracurricular activities or whatever. So it would benefit them as well in providing some choices for those students. And then there is a needs-based, it will pay up to $3,500 to parents that would send their children to a private school, but it's limited at 300% of the poverty level. From my recollection, that's like about $70,000 for a family of four to get the higher payment. I know last time we discussed this at this public forum, I openly, transparently said, 7 of my grandkids are in a private, they're all in grade school yet, but they're at a private school here in Jamestown and in Fargo. And their parents, our daughter-in-law, son-in-law, and our daughter and our son have done well, and they would exceed that, so their kids would not get that, which is fine with me. I mean, they can afford it. Trying to help empower parents that cannot afford it and giving them that option is the way I look at it. We have fantastic schools in North Dakota. My point of view has nothing to do with the schools. And as far as the funding, we're talking 2,400 is a $5,800 bill. And right now, in our budget, the Department of Public Instruction, or the K through 12 public schools, the budget is over $3 billion. And of that, $1.7 billion is from state general fund dollars. That's almost 1/3 of the full state general fund money. I think that's an indication that we are funding education. Now, often I get asked, well, why don't you just take care of human services and education? Well, if you add human services budget with education, that's 77% of the budget in the big picture. Goes to human service and health and human service needs and education. So it is a priority of this state, and it will continue to be a priority. And we will continue to fund our public schools. And if I see that not happening, I would be one of the first ones to step up and say, hey, we need to take care of education. I don't see it as taking money away. I see it as empowering parents and students of our state.
Well, thank you. And there's there's not a lot to add about the conversation. Actually, Senator Wanzik hit on it, one of the points I was going to make. It's not really a public versus private school debate. It's more of empowering parents to make the decisions that would they feel would be best for their children, and the state being able to help with that. It doesn't take any money away from public education.
I'll add just one thing. Actually, yeah, it puts more money in public education. The other thing is, Senator Wanzik said that the bill sponsor wanted to raise the 500 to 1,000 and the 3,500 to 7,000. That was the original bill. And in appropriations, we amended it to cut that in half, so down to 500 and 3,500.
Thank you. A reminder again, if you have questions as we go along, you can submit them. Just raise your hand and we can bring you index cards. Again, coffee and water up here for you to enjoy. Support for local communities and rural. Bills like House Bill 1591 proposing funding for county fair resiliency, and Senate Bill 2390 relating to rural grant programs aimed to support local and rural communities. Are there other efforts underway to ensure sustainability of services and events in smaller communities? And how do you propose to drive growth in industry in Jamestown to ensure all local businesses can thrive? And maybe share what specific initiatives or policies you might be considering to help achieve that for our communities.
This is Representative Bosley's wheelhouse.
Well, one of the bills is the county fair resiliency, which was something I introduced basically to provide a one-to-one, dollar for dollar match for county fairs across the state. We've got approximately 32 counties across the state. This, in its current form, and it passed through the House Appropriations, Senate Committee on the ag side, and now it's in. I'm going to put all the pressure on my good friend Senator Terry Wanzik because it's in front of his committee now. So if it dies, it's his fault.
It won't die. Not even for me.
But it's up to $100,000 per county fair if they get the local dollars to match that, which is basically used for infrastructure and so it's well needed across the state, which I found out. I'm looking initially at our local area here, and then I'm seeing it expand throughout the state and similar needs all throughout the state. A few other bills that are coming across that there's, again, total infrastructure needs, whether it's the county fairs or the cities and roads and all of that, there's a big need. And we're trying to address it. There's several bills. Some of them are, and it's dealing with housing as well. And we're just trying to find out the exact mix that we need to put in place. But there's I think around $50 million currently in for housing needs throughout the state, and the dollars for each. It's kind of, we've got it based on a population base right now. Cities above and below certain population levels will be eligible for various amounts. And I believe there will be something happening there. It's just a matter of, again, how much. And there again, that's an economic booster as well. Some of the other legislators here might have some things that are affecting some of their committees.
I'll just add that economic development, in my mind, as a legislator, is one of the most important things that we do. That is the fuel that drives the economy. We just need to keep growing it. Senate Bill 2390 was asked about, and I see that Senator Terry Wanzik was the prime sponsor, so I'll let him talk about that.
Well, there were a couple of bills trying to address some economic development in rural North Dakota. To understand why we're targeting rural North Dakota, I think there's a passion for our state and the culture and the work ethic, and it's not just in our cities, but it's in rural North Dakota, and a lot of us have a connection to a farm or a small community from North Dakota and care deeply about those communities. If you look at the latest U.S. Census, North Dakota's rural population, and I think the definition of that is somewhere around communities of 3,500 or only so many people per square mile. The population, 39.6% of North Dakota is classified as rural citizens. And if you do the math, that's a little over 300,000 North Dakotans. That's bigger than the city of Fargo. If we speak in one voice, we could have some clout. And I think what we're seeing a transformation in the rural areas, and it's through nobody's fault. It's just the technology of today, and that farms are getting larger. There's less families out there farming, and there's fewer people living out there, but they're still there, and there's these smaller communities don't have access to, grant writers or things of that nature to be able to know how to go about getting some help, and maybe there's some small infrastructure needs that some small community needs, and this is meant to provide some grant funding for them to maybe get some help to do that. I think of the example, I don't know how many of you have had a hamburger basket in Windsor Bar, for instance. Windsor Bar is a small bar and grill in the town of Windsor, west of Jamestown here. Our farm is located out in that area, and they mean as much to our area as the Fargo Dome means to Fargo. But I've even had state officials, the Public Service Commissioner, Randy Chrisman, call me last fall when I was in the field harvesting, wondering where you can get a good hamburger. I told him, go to Windsor Bar. And
You have ownership in that?
No, I don't. But anyway, he called me after it. He said, man, you were right. That was a good hamburger. But the reason I bring them up is she was having some septic, the owner was having some septic sewer system problems. And some of us in the community, including our farm, chipped in and helped fund, for instance, getting her septic tank and sewer line fixed, because that little business means that much to us in that area. It's so convenient to go up when you work in the field. If we didn't bring lunch, you can run up and get a couple hamburger baskets. But anyway, it's to try to help those small rural communities that mean a lot to the rural people in some fashion. And in addition to the bills that were listed and the ones I primary sponsored, also co-sponsored with Senator Mathen, who's from Fargo. He represents Fargo, but he grew up in Edgeley, and he understands the rural issues. A foundation or an endowment fund. It started out wanting $50 million. Well, we appropriators figure we can't fully fund that endowment fund yet. But, it's like I serve on the University of Jamestown College Board of Trustees, and we have a foundation and endowment, and it was built up over years. So that bill is still in front of the legislature, but it's been reduced to $5 million. The thought is it's a unique process, and it could be an endowment that could provide consistent, sustainable funding for small rural communities into the future, but we need to build it up first, and to build it up, you gotta have a starting point. So we're trying to get it passed and get it in there, and even if it isn't accessible right away, if our ancestors 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago would have done that, we'd have that endowment fund now. But looking forward into the future, hopefully we can eventually, every year, if we can add some money to it, or private contributions or things of that nature, or small communities want to put some money in, build up this endowment fund where we could use the earnings of that fund every year to help our small rural communities. That's the intent of this. Trying to help facilitate the needs of rural North Dakota, I guess, is what they're targeting.
Well, there's probably not a lot left to say about this, but let me just start by saying North Dakota has never had more opportunity in economic development than they do right now. And with that, I will say North Dakota, the North Dakota legislature has never taken it more seriously and put aside funds for infrastructure. And what we're really talking about is what's holding back economic development in rural areas is lack of infrastructure. I think we're going to have historic levels of funding for county roads, township roads, transmission, electric transmission, natural gas transmission pipelines. One of the biggest things that we need to make sure we do before we leave the legislative session is assure the pipeline that's being discussed to come from western North Dakota that would go across central North Dakota to Fargo happens. That is going to bring more opportunity to rural North Dakota than probably anything else that we can do. I know the proposed route is north, and then we'll come across the state in just slightly north of Jamestown. But the opportunity for the Spiritwood Energy Park and the city of Jamestown, the city of Fargo, and every small town across that having the possibility to have natural gas just opens up the door for things that are almost unimaginable in the past. We're really in a great position. The state, I assure you, we're going to get the job done this time, and I really look forward to the future for North Dakota.
If I could intervene one more time, as far as the county fair goes, supporting the county fairs. I was a 4-H kid who grew up showing livestock at the Stutzman County Fair, and our kids show livestock at the Stutzman County Fair, and that's why I'm a co-sponsor of the bill, and there's an emotional attachment to that, and I think that's just a part of our culture with these county fairs. So it's not going to die in my community, Mitch. If it dies, it's going to happen somewhere else.
Senator Hedlund touched on the natural gas. I promoted him. Representative Hedlund
Some might be that way.
touched on the natural gas pipeline. That is going to be extremely important because our energy needs just keep going up and up and up with data centers and AI stuff and all that. And so there will be capacity for natural gas fired electrical generation, which we need. So that pipeline is extremely important.
Half of our state is being funded by energy. And so we are limited as far as how much we can actually produce because we can't flare over a certain percentage. So having this pipeline in place is really a big deal. It opens up more oil production. One other thing too that I'll mention just as far as a general economic development component is, I mentioned this last time in case you missed it, ag development and diversification is a big deal, and that's a bill that this whole table was part of sponsoring. Value-added agriculture, in other words, so that a lot of meat processing across the state and big and small towns is because of that bill that we started, and it's not limited to just that. It can be anything ag-related. Thank you.
And we can stay on some economic questions here. I appreciate we have kind of like both age ranges in this question that I'll pose. Are there any bills you're working on to supply and support affordable homes for young families? And on the other side of that, is there property tax relief for elderly homeowners? What's kind of the work there for homeowners in North Dakota, both age ranges, if you can provide?
I think I'm going to pass this on to the guys that deal with the money.
So part of our division in appropriations is housing. And we did that fairly early on, so I don't remember, we discussed it. One of the big problems is a starter home now is like $350,000. Jamestown, the population seems to be pretty stagnant. Not that we could use more housing, but it's more of a problem in some of the larger growing communities where people are moving in. We have the homestead tax credit that affects our 65 and older population, and of course support that.
Well, as far as housing, I don't remember the bill number, but it was Governor Armstrong's proposal, and we did deal with the commerce budget and put the funding in the commerce budget to do so, but it's $50 million to cities, for instance, to help with the infrastructure to facilitate building a home. It doesn't directly go to the home, but homes that if you're looking to expand the home accessibility and build some new homes, you gotta do the development of the infrastructure first, and that gets added onto a homeowner's specials in their property tax payment. So this $50 million that we appropriated can be used by communities to put in sewer, gutter, curbs, things of that nature to facilitate the development. So if it could help keep the cost down for those new homeowners that would build a home there, that's one example of what we've done, and it's still in the budget. I anticipate it's going to make it all the way. Then there are other housing programs that I'm not fully aware of, but I think we could look into and see if there's other things we could do to help facilitate that. Workforce is probably our number one issue. Finding workforce, so much is happening. It's so much dynamic economic development in our state. Our state has a lot of potential. And I think back, I know I've said this last forum we had, when I think back to when I first got in the legislature, number one issue was we didn't have jobs for our kids. They were leaving the state. And that was in the early 90s. That's how long I've been in the legislature. But we've almost reversed that now to the point where we need our kids to stay here. We need our best and brightest to work here, and we need to attract even others to consider working here. And I know we're going to try to do all we can to help. Along with workforce issues is the needs for homes to get, for instance, in Elladale, I don't know, what is it, how many more, 250 people are needed because of the data center, 250, 300 more homes are needed. So, a community like that might be able to use that, some of that state money to develop the streets and the curbs and things like that to help keep the cost down.
There's not a lot more to add. There are existing programs that are aimed to help. We did expand the homestead tax credit for the elderly. I wish I could think of something offhand that we're doing more or for young families directly related to housing, but nothing comes to mind. But I will say that we did just yesterday pass a child care tax credit to an employer who will contribute to the child care of the employee, which is just an additional way to add on to the child care crisis that we face, to help families work through that. When both parents have to work and the cost of childcare now is so excessive. In fact, I just saw a study that in more than half of the states, the cost of providing childcare has exceeded the cost of providing that higher education. It costs more to take care of your kids when they're young now than when they're older, which is kind of amazing. So we continue to work on these as they come through, and the legislature understands the need, and I wished I could tell you, but they're not in my areas where I work, so I don't really know, and I can't speak to what is still out there, but we're working on it.
The one that I was just going through some of my notes, we've touched on this housing bill a couple of times, and Senator Wanzik had referenced it. Senate Bill 2225 is the $50 million bill, and it's providing a lot of flexibility because the needs of every community in the state are so different. So it's really going to be given to the local entities, like Senator Wanzik had mentioned, whether it's new housing developments or we've had a program in the past called the Slum and Blight. So we've got a lot of communities that have homes that maybe aren't being lived in anymore. So these dollars could be eligible to be accessed through that. And that's one I referenced earlier, where there's different dollars available to different size communities. It's actually in one of my committees right now in political subs. We have not acted on it yet. We've got a couple of things, just minor little tweaks we're going to do to that. Right now, there's no caps per entity. We feel we need to have a cap per city, or one city could maybe use up all of the monies allocated for size communities that are in that category. So we're looking at that. But overall, I think it's a good program, and I believe that'll eventually, with a few minor amendments, pass through the House side.
All right. There was recent discussion on House Bill 1258 regarding the Public Service Commission. There's concerns on the taking away rights of property owners through this. That's regarding that transmission facility siting. Is there maybe any clarification on the direction that might be going in conversations?
Well, right now that's on the Senate side, and I think there's really a lot of misunderstanding about what that bill actually does. At least the way I understand the bill, it doesn't take away local decision-making unless that decision is deemed unreasonable. When you're an energy state like North Dakota is, and we can't use all the energy we produce here. We have to have the ability to export it. You need to be able to build linear infrastructure like pipelines and power lines. And if we didn't have the ability to, and this is, I'm trying to figure out how to put this as good or as well as I can. You can't allow a small political subdivision to just zone something out because they don't want it. You have to look at the overall good for all the people across the state. And if we didn't have the ability to at least determine or have an agency determine what's reasonable, you would end up not being able to build it because you would have what is the most cost-effective to everybody, because let's face it, we all pay the cost for these projects. So they need to be at least tried to be kept as reasonably priced as we can. But if you ended up with just nothing but a zigzag across the state, you're not going to have the ability to proceed forward with those projects. So it's my experience that the companies that are working here are doing their best to accommodate private property rights and landowners. And the very last resort is eminent domain, which is kind of become a dirty word to even talk about. And it's very rarely used. And in most cases, there are ways to work around it. But what's been brought to my attention is in regards to like the JetX line out here, is you have property owners that are even unwilling to take a phone call from the companies. And how is the company supposed to try to find a remedy when the landowner won't even have the discussion with them? That's some of the problems we're facing with this. The legislature doesn't like to get involved, with prosperity, economic development, and certainly we don't want to intrude on people's private property rights. But in the past, in history, where would we have ever gotten if we didn't have at least the ability to look at what is the best for the public overall? And in the very worst case, there have been a few and very few occasions where eminent domain has had to have been used. So, my suggestion to any property owner who has not yet talked to Otter Tail in this case with this particular line, please accept, at least take their phone call, sit down with them, and if you can't come to some kind of amenable agreement, well, that's a decision you and the company will make. And let's just hope that we can find a route for this very, very critical piece of electric transmission infrastructure that we need.
Well, it's trying to find a balance with property rights and economic development. As I said, and as Representative Evans said, there's been a lot of development in our state, and we're dependent on energy and agriculture, and it requires a lot of those projects to be done. It's to the benefit of everybody. And I think the situation that 1258 is trying to address is those people, they call them members of the NIMBY association, not in my backyard, but they like the energy dollars that it's creating, but they don't want to have to be inconvenienced. And certainly we do not support any project being disrespectful or disregarding property rights or property owners. And I know that the projects that are being discussed, there's property owners getting, if the transmission line crosses your land, you're going to get about $100,000 and $150,000 for that transmission line to cross your 1 mile of property. And if you're involved with the pipelines, I know the carbon capture project, if you have a pipeline buried in your property, you will be rewarded for that. And I've been told you can make up to $100,000 to $150,000 by giving them an easement to put that pipeline there. And if it's buried, you can continue to farm your land. They're not going to take any land away, but it helps complete the project. And all these projects are tied together. People think of the transmission line, they don't realize that has an impact on oil. And some people might say, well, what's electricity have to do with oil? Well, we could be in North Dakota, we could be exceeding our current 1.1 million barrels a day. We could be pumping a lot more oil and have even more resources and more prosperity for our state. But what's limiting us is the natural gas that comes with it. We have such an immense amount of natural gas that we've been flaring it some in the past, but we can no longer do that. You cannot flare the oil or natural gas, just burn it off so you can drill for more oil. So by putting pipelines in and things of that nature and utilizing more natural gas, and like in Spiritwood, I think it's a Great River Energy, I think they're going to convert from coal to natural gas. Well, that ties into oil. And all those projects and all that energy development is coordinated and count on one another. It's economic development, economic prosperity for North Dakota. And it's true that, like the carbon capture pipeline, they've been able to sign up over 80% voluntarily the easements for that pipeline. So, we don't like to see them use eminent domain. I hope that the project developers sit down with the landowners, treat them with respect, work with them in trying to address their needs, and repay them for their inconvenience. And I expect that they be treated that way, but we can't, to get these projects done, we can't let one small subdivision stop the whole project. We would never have gotten rural electricity on our farms if we allowed that in times. It's a difficult situation to be in because I truly believe in property rights, but I also can see the need for the economic development, the future of our state, and having opportunities here, good paying jobs, prosperity, and a great future for our next generation. So that's where it's coming down to. That bill is trying to address the situation and trying to find a balance to addressing that dilemma when we have a bottleneck stoppage of a project. So it's tough to address. There's a lot of these bills that are not black and white. There's a lot of gray area, and I understand the arguments from both sides, but we're trying to find that balance to treat everybody fair and to continue to develop North Dakota's economy.
So Representative Edlund and Senator Wanzik said about all that needs to be said. They really gave good reasons for why we need 1258. On the flip side, you've got, they address the payments that you get for easements, and so you get a couple people that can block what payments other people get by just not allowing them to go on their land. They've got to go around. So we have not heard 1258 in the Senate yet, but
It had, yes.
yeah, but we haven't heard it in the Senate.
No.
So Senator Wanzik and myself and Representative Edlund are co-sponsors on that bill, so we will definitely be supporting it.
Okay, real quickly, I'd like to thank again everybody for being out here today, and thank the legislators for taking some time out of their Saturday to be here as well. I will encourage you, if we didn't get to a question today, or if there's more clarification you want on anything that was discussed today, their emails, their phone numbers, they are available on the state legislature website. You are encouraged to reach out to them, talk to them, and they'll be sure to correspond with you as they can. So we can leave off with one more question. There's been the discussion of passenger rail returning to the state of North Dakota on a pre-existing line that used to operates, would the legislature be in support of the return of this passenger rail from Chicago through Seattle with stops in Jamestown, Bismarck, Mandan, Dickinson, and Medora?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for taking your Saturday to be here. I personally love the idea. I've traveled by train. It's fantastic. It's cool. People will come up here for that and also increase the tourism and having Jamestown as the stop. I appreciate the vision of our city council leaders in supporting that. So I'm excited about it, looking forward to it. Travel train if you can.
I would be in support of it, obviously. This is more of a federal level appropriations and all of those kinds of things. And I think everybody would be in support of this. Well, I shouldn't say everybody. A large number of people would be in support of this, but it's a huge, huge amount of money. So that's, you know, dollars are always maybe something that, you know, you got to consider. But this would also be a multi-year project. It's not like, yeah, we decide to do it and it's built overnight. It's a you know, decades worth of work in this process. So, but yes, I would be in support.
I would be in support also. You know, I agree with Representative Osley that, you know, you have to look at the dollars, but, you know, it certainly seems like a worthy project.
I, along with the other colleagues here, would support it definitely. I know I visited somewhat with Mr. Steele, city commissioner, about it, and if there's a need for some state funding or some help, I'm imagining the Department of Transportation budget would be the most likely place to seek that funding, and you know, we need to maybe visit a little more about what absolutely is needed from the local sheriff to try and help. I think we could do that.
Yeah, I definitely support a project like that. It seems like it would make a lot of sense to me. I don't know what else to say about it.
Excellent. I think with that, we will thank you all for being out here again, and we want to thank the North Dakota League of Women Voters for helping us with questions today, and thank our legislators again for being here, and hope you all have a good rest of the Saturday.